Warning: this story contains graphic depictions of violence, murder, and psychological horror. It is not suitable for children or sensitive audiences. Viewer discretion is advised. I'm an Uber driver in Chicago, and I've seen some weird things in my time, but nothing compares to what happened to me on one of my pickups. It still gives me chills when I think about it. It was a Friday night, and I was driving around the downtown area looking for passengers. The streets were busy with people going out to bars, clubs, and restaurants. I got a ping on my app, and I accepted it. The destination was a hotel near the airport, about 20 minutes away. I drove to the pickup location, which was a dark alley behind a convenience store. I parked my car and waited for the passenger to show up. I checked the app and it said his name was John. He had a 4.8 rating, which was pretty good. I looked around, but I didn't see anyone in the alley. It was quiet and eerie, with only a few dim lights from the store windows. I waited for a few minutes and then I heard a knock on my window. I turned my head and saw a man standing next to my car. He was wearing a black hoodie, jeans, and sneakers. He had a backpack on his shoulder and was holding a phone in his hand. He looked at me and smiled. "Hey, are you my Uber?" I nodded and unlocked the doors. He opened the door and got in the back seat. He put his backpack on the floor and buckled his seatbelt. "Hi, John." "Hi, thanks for picking me up." "No problem. You're going to the hotel near the airport, right?" "Yep, that's right." I started the car and drove out of the alley. I followed the GPS directions on my phone, which took me to the highway. "So, what brings you to Chicago?" I asked, trying to make some small talk. "Oh, just visiting some friends." "Cool. How long are you staying?" "Just for the weekend?" "Nice." We drove in silence for a while. He didn't seem very talkative, which was fine by me. Some passengers like to chat, some don't. I glanced at him through the rearview mirror, and I noticed that he was looking at his phone. He was typing something on it, but I couldn't see what it was. I turned my attention back to the road. The traffic was light, and we were making good time. I checked the app, and it said we had about 10 minutes left until we reached the hotel. "So, do you like driving for Uber?" I looked at him again through the mirror. He had put his phone down and was looking at me. "Yeah, it's not bad. It pays the bills." "I bet you meet a lot of interesting people." "Sometimes." "What's the craziest thing that ever happened to you?" I thought for a moment. There were a few stories that came to mind, but none of them were very appropriate to share with a stranger. "Nothing too crazy," I lied. "Just some drunk people being loud or rude." He nodded. "I see." He picked up his phone again and started typing something on it. I wondered what he was doing. Was he texting someone? Was he checking his email? Was he browsing social media? I decided not to ask him. It was none of my business anyway. We drove for another few minutes and then we reached the exit for the airport. I took it and followed the signs for the hotel. "We're almost there." "Great." He put his phone down again and looked out the window. The hotel was a large building with a sign that said Holiday Inn Express. I pulled into the parking lot and drove to the entrance. There were a few cars parked there, but not many. "Here we are." "Thanks." He unbuckled his seatbelt and reached for his backpack, opened the door and got out of the car. He closed the door and walked towards the hotel lobby, not looking back or saying anything. I watched him go until he disappeared inside the building. I sighed and checked the app. It said that the ride was complete and that I had earned $18.75 for it. Not bad, I thought. I rated him 5 stars and gave him a compliment. Friendly passenger. He rated me 5 stars too and gave me a tip, $5. Nice, I thought. I smiled and drove away from the hotel. I looked for another passenger on my app, hoping to get a few more rides before calling it a night. I didn't think much of John or the ride. It was just another normal night for me. Or so I thought. The next day, I woke up to a loud knock on my door. I got out of bed and put on some clothes. I opened the door and saw 2 police officers standing there. They had badges and guns, and they looked serious. "Are you the owner of a 2015 Toyota Corolla, license plate number IL123ABC?" one of them asked. I nodded. "Yes, that's me. Can we come in?" I nodded again. "Sure." I stepped aside and let them in. They walked into my living room and looked around. I followed them and closed the door behind me. "What's going on?" I asked, feeling nervous. Sir, we need to ask you some questions about your Uber activity last night. My Uber activity, I repeated, confused. Yes, sir. We have reason to believe that you picked up a suspect in a murder case. A suspect in a murder case? I echoed, shocked. Yes, sir. His name is John Smith, and he's wanted for killing his girlfriend in their apartment. He showed me a picture of John on his phone. It was the same guy who I had picked up from the alley and dropped off at the hotel. He looked exactly the same, except for one thing. He had blood on his hoodie, jeans, and sneakers. My eyes widened and my mouth dropped open. I felt a surge of fear and disbelief. That's him, I said. That's the guy I picked up last night. Are you sure? Yes, I'm sure. He was wearing the same clothes, and he had the same backpack and phone. Where did you pick him up from? From an alley behind a convenience store on 5th and Main. What time was that? Around 10. And where did you drop him off? At a hotel near the airport, the Holiday Inn Express. What time was that? Around 10:30. They looked at each other and nodded. Sir, do you have any proof of this ride? Yes, I do, I said. I have the app on my phone. It shows the pickup and drop-off locations, the time, the fare, and the rating. Can we see it? Sure, I said. Here. I took out my phone and opened the Uber app. I showed them the ride history, which confirmed everything I had said. They looked at it and nodded again. Sir, this is very important. Did he say anything to you during the ride? Did he mention anything about his girlfriend or what he had done? I shook my head. No, he didn't. He was very quiet. He only asked me a few questions about driving for Uber, and then he was on his phone most of the time. What was he doing on his phone? I don't know, I said. He was typing something, but I couldn't see what it was. They looked at each other again and frowned. Sir, do you mind if we take your phone for a while? We need to check if he left any traces on it. I hesitated. I didn't like the idea of giving them my phone, but I also wanted to cooperate with them. Okay, I said. But can I get it back soon? We'll try to be quick. We just need to scan it for any evidence. He took my phone and handed it to the first officer. The first officer took out a device from his pocket and plugged it into my phone. He pressed some buttons and waited for a few seconds. Then he looked at the screen and gasped. What is it? The first officer showed him the screen. It was a live video feed of a dark room with a bloody corpse on a bed. It was John's girlfriend. She had been stabbed multiple times in the chest and throat. She was dead, and John was holding the camera. I gasped in horror as the full weight of the situation dawned on me. When I first started driving for Uber, I never could have imagined the kinds of creepy and bizarre situations I'd get myself into. I guess that's the risk you take being a rideshare driver in a small rural town where people know more about you than you know about them. I moved to the tiny town of Oakwood after getting a job offer I couldn't refuse. Nestled deep in the mountains, it was the kind of remote small town where everyone knew each other. The kind of place where you couldn't run to the grocery store without chatting with at least 3 people. Quaint cafes, mom-and-pop shops, and windy mountain roads that all the locals navigated with ease. I was an outsider trying to make a living, so I jumped at the chance to drive for Uber when they expanded into the area. Oakwood was so spread out that people depended on rides to get around. At first, I loved the flexibility while meeting interesting characters, but it didn't take long for things to get strange. My first indication was a middle-aged woman I picked up from the local dive bar. She seemed cheerful at first, making small talk in between giving me directions to her home. But about halfway through the ride, her tone changed. She became nervous, checking the locks and looking out the windows repeatedly. When I asked if she was okay, she just muttered, "You can never be too safe out here." Before getting out, she looked directly at me and said, "Be careful who you give rides to. Not everyone is who they seem." Then she rushed into her dark house without another word. A few days later, I picked up 3 men from the same bar heading to a house party. They were already drunk, laughing too loudly and making crude jokes. As we turned down an unlit dirt road deep in the woods, one said, "You Uber drivers will drive anyone anywhere, huh? No matter where we're going?" His words lingered in the car like a dark warning. By far the most terrifying passenger was a silent young woman I picked up after midnight. She had me drive deep into a remote wooded area I'd never been before. The moonlight revealed glimpses of abandoned shacks covered in graffiti. Strange symbols marked the trees we passed. The woman never spoke, just stared straight ahead while wringing her hands nervously. When we finally arrived at her destination, a rundown house in the middle of the woods, she whispered, "Go back to where you came from," before she vanished into the darkness. My skin crawled as I drove away, completely rattled by the encounter. Who was this woman, and what were her intentions by luring me out there? Clearly, she didn't want to be disturbed and knew this area held some sinister secrets. Secrets that, as an outsider, I wasn't meant to discover. Despite all the weird vibes I was getting, I needed the Uber income, so I kept driving. One foggy night, a pickup request came from an isolated dirt road past the outskirts of town. Against my better judgment, I headed out there hoping it was just some kids needing a ride. As I pulled up to the pin drop location, my headlights cut through the fog, revealing a gruesome sight. 3 figures in dark robes were gathered in a circle performing some kind of ritual. The wailing screams of a person tied up in the center pierced the night, until they went silent after one swift motion from the robed figures. I gripped the steering wheel in horror, unsure if they had spotted me or not. Part of me wanted to intervene, but I knew I was helpless against whatever evil was at work here. I threw the car in reverse and sped off, praying the fog concealed my escape. When I got home, my hands shook so bad I could barely unlock the front door. I kept the lights on all night, half expecting those dark figures to come looking for me. Had I witnessed some kind of satanic cult ritual out there? What were they doing to that poor victim? And how did my Uber request get sent from such a nightmarish scene? The next morning, I found a piece of paper tucked under my windshield wiper. Scrawled in red letters, it said, "Leave now or end up like the others." That was the final straw. No more creepy rides. No more passengers luring me onto ominous dirt roads in the middle of the night. No amount of money was worth being entangled in whatever darkness inhabited Oakwood and its surrounding woods. I packed my bags immediately and drove straight to the next town over. The further away I got from Oakwood, the more I felt like I could breathe again. Of course, I couldn't explain any of this to the police without sounding crazy, but at least I escaped before ending up like the others. I've been working as an Uber driver for about a year now, and I've seen some weird things in this city. I live in New York, the largest city in the United States, and it's full of skyscrapers, bridges, and people. It's also full of noise, pollution, and crime. Sometimes I wonder what goes on behind the closed doors of the apartments I drive by, or what the people I pick up are hiding from me. Most of the time, I don't ask questions. I just do my job and try to make some money. But there was one night that changed everything for me. A night that made me question my reality and my sanity. A night that still haunts me to this day. It was a Saturday night, around midnight, and I was driving around Midtown, looking for passengers. The app pinged me with a request from a nearby bar. I accepted it and drove to the location. The bar was one of those divey ones, with neon signs and loud music. I parked in front of the entrance and waited for my passenger. A few minutes later, a woman came out of the bar. She was short and curvy, wearing a red dress and high heels. She had blonde hair and blue eyes, and she looked like she was in her 20s. She had a purse in one hand and a phone in the other. She walked towards my car with a drunken stumble. She opened the back door and got in. She put her purse on the seat next to her and her phone on her lap. She didn't say hello or anything. She just told me her destination, Brooklyn Bridge. I nodded and started driving. The bridge was about 5 miles away, so it would take about 15 minutes to get there, depending on the traffic. I glanced at the rearview mirror and saw her staring at her phone with a smile on her face. I tried to make some small talk, but she didn't seem interested. She just gave me short answers or ignored me completely. She was clearly not in the mood for conversation. I decided to leave her alone and focus on the road. I turned on the radio and listened to some music. The night was cold and clear except for the occasional fog or mist. We were about halfway to the bridge when things started to get weird. I noticed that she was fidgeting with her phone, swiping it repeatedly. She looked nervous and anxious. She kept looking at the screen, then at me, then at the window. I tried to ignore her and keep driving, but I couldn't help but feel curious. "Everything okay?" I asked her casually. She didn't answer me. She just kept swiping her phone. "Miss," I repeated. She finally looked at me and said in a low voice, "Don't look." I was confused by her response. "Don't look?" I repeated. "Yes," she said. "Don't look." "Why?" I asked. She didn't answer me. She just looked away and swiped her phone faster. I felt a chill run down my spine. Something was wrong here. Very wrong. I looked at the GPS and saw that we were still 2 miles away from the bridge. There was no way I could get there without looking at least once at the road or the surroundings. "What do you mean by don't look?" I asked her again. She turned her head slowly and looked at me with a terrified expression on her face. She said one word. "Them." "Them?" I echoed. She nodded and pointed at the window. I followed her finger and saw nothing but darkness outside. "Who are them?" I asked her. She shook her head and whispered, "They're watching us." "Who's watching us?" I asked her louder. She didn't answer me. She just clutched her phone tighter and stared out of the window. I felt a surge of panic rising in my chest. This woman was either crazy or in serious trouble. Either way, I wanted to get rid of her as soon as possible. I stepped on the gas pedal and tried to speed up, hoping to reach the bridge faster. But then I saw something that made my blood run cold. In the distance ahead of us, I saw 2 pairs of red eyes glowing in the dark. They were getting closer and closer until they were right in front of us. They were watching us. I looked in the rearview mirror and saw 2 more pairs of red eyes behind us. They were getting closer and closer until they were right behind us. They were watching us. I felt a surge of adrenaline coursing through my veins. I gripped the steering wheel tighter and tried to escape them, turning left and right, changing lanes and running red lights. But they were faster and smarter. They matched my every move, staying in front of me and behind me, never letting me go. They were watching us. I heard her scream in the back seat. "Drive faster," she shouted. "Don't let them see us." I didn't need her to tell me that. I was already driving as fast as I could, but it was no use. They were too close, too persistent, too relentless. And then they made their move. One of them pulled up next to me on the passenger side. I saw a dark figure in the driver's seat, holding something in his hand. It looked like a camera. He pointed it at me and pressed a button. I heard a flash and felt a blinding light in my eyes. I screamed and lost control of the car. I swerved to the left, hitting the other car in front of me. I heard metal crunching and glass shattering. I spun out of control, crashing into a lamppost. I felt a jolt of impact, and then everything went black. Everything was foggy and muffled as I slowly regained consciousness. My vision was blurry, but I could make out flashing lights and shadows moving around me. The acrid smell of smoke filled my nose. As my head cleared a bit, I realized I was still in the driver's seat of my wrecked Uber car. The entire front was crushed and pressed up against a mangled lamppost. That's when the events leading up to the crash came flooding back. The young woman in the red dress, her cryptic warnings, those sinister glowing red eyes following us through the darkness. I tried turning to check on my passenger, though deep down I knew it was futile. As expected, the back seat was empty save for her discarded purse. No sign of the woman herself. Panic rose in my chest as I wondered what had become of her after the collision. The shadows around the car took shape as EMTs and police officers. Someone was trying to talk to me, but their words blurred together in my ringing ears. As they pulled me from the vehicle, questions raced through my spinning mind. Who or what had been pursuing us through the night? What did they want? Was I losing my grip on reality, or was there truly some malevolent force at work here? I pleaded for answers from the officers and medics, raving like a madman about the red eyes and the woman's warnings. But they just exchanged worried glances and tried to calm me down, clearly convinced it was all a hallucination. As I was loaded into the ambulance, I craned my head around, searching the amassed crowd and blinking lights for any sign of the woman. But she had simply vanished without a trace into the pitch-black night. Over the coming weeks, I scoured the news and online for any reports of missing persons matching her description. I even returned to the area of the crash during the day, searching for clues as to where she could have disappeared to. But it was like she never existed at all. The authorities eventually wrote me off as traumatized and delusional from the crash. But I know what I saw.